I'm Dr. Fiona Lovely, and this is the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. I'm taking the taboos of menopause and perimenopause and bringing light to the dark. No bullshit, no shame. It's time for us to gain a new paradigm in female health, out with the old and in with the new, and I'm bringing fresh perspectives from someone in the arena. I've been practicing women's health for nearly 20 years, and I'm spilling the tea on what it means to live at midlife, knowing that the best is yet to come. I'm sharing my Gen X approach to living through this transition. Sassy, a bit sweary, and always honest. Tactical tips and instantly usable information is my aim. I hope to make you laugh and that you learn something new that helps you embrace the change. Together, we bring power to the peri. Onward to the podcast. Hello, listeners. It's Dr. Fiona Lovely, and this is the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast. And today I'm welcoming back an old friend, Dr. Gregory Kelly, to the show. He was the first guy to come on the show a few years back, and he was just as good in this conversation as he was that first time we met and visited. He's just so easy to talk to and listen to. So let me introduce my guest. Gregory Kelly is the Senior VP of Product Development at Qualia Life, naturopathic physician, and author of the book Shapeshift. He was the author of the journal Alternative Medicine Review and has been an instructor at the University of Bridgeport in the College of Naturopathic Medicine, where he taught classes in advanced clinical nutrition, counseling skills, and doctor-patient relationships. Dr. Kelly has published hundreds of articles on natural medicine and nutrition, contributed 3 chapters to the textbook of natural medicine, and has more than 30 journal articles indexed on PubMed. His areas of expertise include nootropics, anti-aging and regenerative medicine, weight management, sleep, and the chronobiology of performance and health. Now, Dr. Kelly was to come on the show today to talk about magnesium, everything we need to know. But of course, we have to get into some of the nitty-gritty of the science of cellular aging, what we call cellular senescence. And also we talk about something called akkermansia, which is a bug that lives in the probiotic or lives in the microbiome of human beings. And it turns out this bug is really involved in ability to have either a smaller body versus a larger body. Very interesting body of research that we just recently got to hear about, and we talk about that a little bit. Now, magnesium deficiency is very common. Approximately 20% of the United States is said to have some kind of magnesium deficiency, which is pretty interesting stuff when you think about it, because magnesium, as Greg shares with us, we used to get from our water sources, but we simply don't get it anymore for many reasons. But if you're not getting it there, then where are you getting it? So having a high quality supplement that gives you the minerals that you used to get, or we used to get from our water supply, really important. So we talk about the formulation of the Magnesium Plus supplement for Qualia, and what it looks like when you have a magnesium deficiency in the body. There was lots for us to discuss in terms of bioavailability, absorption, the different forms of magnesium, why it's important, how it's involved in the 12 hallmarks of aging, and also how magnesium makes some really important neurotransmitters. Things that make us feel rested and rewarded and happy and that help us sleep. So magnesium's kind of a big deal. If you're a patient in my office, you know I've been recommending magnesium for years and years. And so it was lovely to do a deep dive with Dr. Gregory Kelly. So listen in. I hope you found this conversation as useful as I did. I learned a ton. So as always, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoy this conversation on magnesium with Dr. Gregory Kelly as much as I enjoyed. AG1, the way I start my healthy days. With my AG1, I get a daily dose of vitamins, minerals, pre and probiotics, adaptogens, and more. It's daily self care for my busy life. It helps me fill the nutrition gaps, supports immune health, and supports gut for healthy digestion. It's once a day, easy to drink, and packed with bioavailable ingredients in a convenient formula. I am proud to have had AG1 as a sponsor of this show for many years. It's a nutritional supplement I stand behind and I take every single day. Start with AG1 and notice the difference for yourself. It's a great first step to investing in your health. Try AG1 and get a free bottle of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase at drinkag1.com/Fiona Lovely. That's a $48 value for free if you go to drinkag1.com/Fiona Lovely. Check it out. Dr. Greg Kelly, welcome to the show again. Thanks for joining me again on Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast.
I'm thrilled to be back today.
Well, you might not remember this, but when you and I first spoke, you were the first guy to come on the show.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning that. Yeah.
And you're still up there as one of my very favorites. So thank you for setting the bar really, really high. And of course, that conversation we talked about cellular senescence, which was a new-ish conversation to me at the time. I'm sure you've been in it forever and ever and ever. But bringing that level of understanding about cellular aging to my community was, I think, a really, really important and timely conversation.
Well, thank you. I think I would say it's a conversation that I feel like I'm starting to hear more from the rest of the world around me, at least in our world, right? You and I were just at a big longevity conference, and in addition to me speaking about senescent cells and what we might do, the speaker right before me was talking about senescent cells. So
Yes, absolutely. And I thought one of the most interesting conversations I was listening in on over the weekend was Daisy Robinson speaking about ovarian senescence and how can we go about managing the aging of the ovarian cells, because it not just manages our fertility, but also our brain, our bones, our muscles. There's a lot of things involved. And so, as always, science is marching forward with this. So give us the update. I think we spoke about, I think it was about 18 months ago. I remember it being warm, unlike right now. So I think it was about June. I'm going to guess June 2023 was when we spoke. And so what's new? What have we learned about the aging of cells since then?
yeah, so a few things that I shared in my presentation at A4M, and for listeners, A4M stands for American Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. So that's the four A's. And Dr. Lovely and I were just both there getting more educated recently. And so I did a presentation on senescent cells there for continuing education for the practitioners that wanted to learn more. But a few of the things I thought were really interesting in the last year that had been learned. One was they transplanted senescent cells into the skin of animals, and it's would have been expected that it would have some local effects there, causing inflammation and skin aging. But what was really interesting is it caused remote effects as well. So their brain, their physical performance. So and the reason why is senescent cells secrete all kinds of inflammatory and other signaling compounds into the environment around them. So we've known that. A Dr. Judith Campisi at Buck Institute discovered that back 20 years ago or so. But I don't think we really grasp how systemic that signaling could be until that study. And then there was another one somewhat similar where they let senescent cells get out of handle in the liver, and they also cause cognitive and muscle impairment. So, that was, I think, big, right? No matter where senescent cells are, they can contribute to things going all through our body in an aging and a functional sense. So that would be one new thing. Another new thing would just be the growing amount of research, and again, mostly animal models, because senescent cells, there's no biomarker or lab test that we, as humans or doctors, patients can go and get. So they usually do tissue samples, and then they have to really know what they're doing to measure senescent cells. But since we would have talked last a year and a half ago, there's just more and more studies connecting the growth in the number of senescent cells with really any area that is notorious in aging. So whether that's cognitive decline, heart issues, joint issues, bone health, or even ovarian aging. So, I think we're still in the early days there, but everything that we would have talked about a year and a half ago, if anything, is even more cemented as, this is something that the medical world is going to, continue to study scientifically and likely, attempt to develop solutions for.
Yes, wow. So I'm going to guess you're like me, and you probably love to look at new research that comes out. You probably get all of the alerts. I once had a friend say to me when I told her I was taking all these journals on my, on my vacation, on my beach vacation, she said, "Why are you taking work with you?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, no, this is fun for me." Are you the same way, Dr. Kelly?
Yeah, so typically every other year we'll go on vacation for about 2 weeks in Spain. I live in the San Diego area, so it's a long way to go for just a week. So I usually stay two. And often we'll meet someone from my family. My mom joined me on quite a few trips. But I'll always bring what you said, like studies to read and other things to just do at least for an hour or two over coffee in a cafe in the morning. And I enjoy that. So yeah, just
Yes.
like you, it's fun learning and becoming
Yes.
smarter. And there's always new things to learn. This week there was just a study that I thought was really fabulous, and it was funded by Nestle's. For the people that know Nestle's, we know for Nestle's. Well, Nestle's Quick was a big, chocolate
Yeah.
thing when
Yeah.
I was a kid.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the chocolates and other things. But Nestle's is actually a really big dietary supplement company. They own some very well-known brands. And they sponsor a lot of research. But the gist of this study was they were looking at muscle stem cells in aging animals. And what they discovered was that niacinamide, that very specific form of B3, helped. And this was a short study. I think it was only about 7 days, but helped improve muscle stem cells in these animals. But NR, nicotinamide riboside, which is one of the newer B3s, didn't. And the reason was that it wasn't just about boosting NAD, because that's what these things do, like nicotinamide riboside, NMN, niacinamide, flushing nicotinus, any of these things with the N in it, that stands for the N part of NAD. They all can increase NAD, but that wasn't why the stem cells were invigorated or improved in these animals. So niacinamide did something that NR couldn't, which was fascinating, because usually when you hear these, different things, it's all about the NAD story, and it wasn't NAD that was, what the action was, and niacinamide could just do what was needed better, getting into muscles and activating these stem cells. So I thought that was really cool, because before it was like, yeah, niacinamide's maybe just, not quite as good form as NR, and now it's like, no, they both do really cool things, but not identical cool things.
Right. Yes. And the nice thing about the niacinamide is we've known about that particular vitamin for a long time. It's easily made. It's inexpensive. We don't have to do these fancy things to get it to a place that we can use. One of the things that I actually found most interesting was listening to Peter Attia and Colleen Cutcliffe speak about acromantia. And
Mm.
yes. Oh boy, that's a fascinating conversation. And I am all for the inclusion of any kind of information that gives us a better understanding of the obesity problem that we have. And what I am speaking about, the listeners, so that Dr. Kelly and I aren't just geeking out here, because we totally do that, is so that you understand what I'm talking about. Is Akkermansia as part of the microbiome in people, it turns out, that are a smaller bodied, whereas it seems to be absent in people that have obesity or are larger bodied. And there was this Colleen shared a study that I haven't actually looked at yet, so I looked at sort of the condensed version of it up on the screen. Were you there in the room for that one?
I wasn't, but I know quite a bit about Akkermansia, so go ahead.
Okay, well, I should stop talking and let you talk
No.
about it.
Like, finish sharing that. You might know something I haven't seen yet. So.
I doubt it. But anyways, thank you for giving me that time. But what I found really interesting was that, and Peter Attia was saying that it is an anaerobe, so it's very difficult to get it. You can't just pop it into a probiotic, and you have to engineer it in some way. And so that part of the conversation was really interesting too. So I'd love to hear your thoughts after, and what you know about this to share with the community, please.
Yeah, so the term I use is keystone species. So all ecosystems have certain organisms that are more important than others. Every organism is important, but some are just more important. So elephants in their ecosystem in Africa would be one of those, right? If you removed the elephants, the whole ecosystem would suffer tremendously. Years ago, they reintroduced wolves to, I think it was Yellowstone, but it might have been Yosemite. It
Yes.
was one of the big parks.
Yeah.
You can find a video of like a time-lapsed thing, and the course of rivers were changed over the next, I think it was about 2 years, because they changed the deer hanging out by the river, which then allowed the grass to regrow, which then firmed up the riverbank, which like it just had this ripple effect. So all ecosystems from an ecologist perspective would have keystone species. And many of the things we think of as probiotics, your lactobacillus, your bifidobacteria, are not those. They're not unimportant. They're in our gut microbiome, but they're, as you mentioned, Akkermansia is anaerobic, right? It doesn't like oxygen. So the ones that we used to know about pre-genetic sequencing of the gut microbiome were really the ones that were in yogurt that can live in oxygen, right? So, but now that they've, been able to sequence our gut microbiome, those are lesser important. And there's other ones that would be the equivalent of the keystone species. And Akkermansia is one of those. So it's super important. In its niche, which is the mucus layer, that would be near our intestinal lining, it's the king. It's the elephant in that. And if it's properly supported, then that whole ecosystem, that niche of our microbiome, does a lot better. And if it's not, then what would classically be the case, as we get older, Akkermansia populations go down. You mentioned the connection to obesity, metabolic type syndrome as well, and lots of other things. It's really important for gut permeability to counter that, right? Like the leaky gut story. So yeah, it plays a really important role. And it was one of the things when I was creating what became currently, it's called Qualia Symbiotic, but it's being renamed Qualia Probiotic Plus in January. So by the time this goes live, that might be what it's called on our website. But we have a resistant starch in that called Solnol, that in their human study, they increased the abundance of Akkermansia. I think it was 400%. And that was the reason that I put that particular prebiotic in, because we want to give more food supply to these keystone species. Just like in a real ecosystem, we want to make sure there's plenty of food for the things that we want to support their growth.
Yes, like the wolves and the deer in Yellowstone. Yeah. Yes. I think there's actually been some documentaries made about that whole change to the ecosystem that since the wolves were reintroduced. What a fascinating thing. What a fascinating thing.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming with this study, like I said, I haven't looked it up. I didn't know we were going to talk about this today. Otherwise I would have come in a little more, a little more informed, but, I'm assuming that there was this whole identical twins. One was small bodied, one was larger bodied, and then they did fecal transplants to the mice and back and forth between adding Akkermansia and not. So this is a fascinating thing to me. So is this done? I'm assuming this is going to be done via fecal transplant would be the way to do that.
Yeah, if they were, for listeners, this would be a truism. the first 1,000 days of our lives is when our microbiome gets established. And so, I would use the analogy of the San Diego Zoo since I live here. So the animals in the zoo are decided early. And, if something doesn't take up residence, then it's really hard for that organism to get a foothold. Scientists would call it colonization resistance. So my microbiome would be different than yours, Dr. Lovely, which, and everyone's on the listening would be different. If we had identical twins listening, their microbiomes would be slightly different, just like their fingerprints would be. But within that, many of us would have overlap in some of the species that we have. And if not that species, the job it would perform. But Akkermansia, most of us would have Akkermansia, but we might not have enough of it to do its job adequately, right? It's being outcompeted by other things. And so, often most things follow a Goldilocks rule. If we had too much Akkermansia, it would cause trouble, just like if there was too much, too many wolves in Yellowstone and not enough deer for them to feed on. So, the context always is we want to make sure we have the right amount of things, and then we support them. And, giving adequate food supply. If we don't have a specific organism, then reintroducing it. But most of us have Akkermansia. We just need to feed it better. And what it seems to thrive on, its natural food supply would be something called mucins, which we secrete. Our gut lining cells secrete mucins, but things like polyphenols fortify mucins. So with more polyphenols in our diet, and polyphenols for listeners would be compounds from plant. As a matter of fact, the quasinolytic that I was on last is a very polyphenol-rich blend. So certain things, make it so the same amount of mucin would feed more Akkermansia, as an example.
And this is what you've done with the probiotic.
Yeah, that was the approach we took. Let's include some probiotics, but let's really focus on the things that allowed the ecosystem to be healthy and thrive. So,
okay.
and magnesium is one of those things, believe it or not, which I know we're going to talk a lot more about.
Yes, because you have expertise here, and I want to have the conversation about magnesium because it's so important. So, say the name when you say all these things about Akkermansia and its food, etc., and it being one of those keystone species. I love this. These analogies and examples are just beautiful. Make it really simple for me, for sure. What was the name of the probiotic again?
Oh, there's a prebiotic. It's called Solnul, is the brand name, Solnul, and it's a resistant starch made from raw potatoes.
Okay.
And that they did a study where a 3.5 gram dose, like I said, it was about a 400% increase in Akkermansia over their study.
Okay.
And in part, it's because everything's interacting in the microbiome, and that resistant starch is being degraded by other keystone species that then just have a ripple effect on making it so that Akkermansia can compete better in their niche.
Okay. So I want what you just talked about, and you said it's in the probiotic. What's the name of the probiotic, please?
Yeah, so it's currently, we're recording this in late December 2024. It's currently, if you went to our website, it would say Qualia Synbiotic, but it'll be renamed Qualia Probiotic Plus sometime in mid-January.
Okay, amazing. I'm super going to.
Oh,
I'm on my way to order some.
So.
Well, I mean, just seeing the studies and seeing how Colleen and Peter talked about it and what you've just said to me, I love the conversation around how we are healthy and when things go sideways, then what's involved. And of course, we're this biology that is so complex. You and I will study this for the rest of our lives, and we will just be scratching the surface, and people after us will go on to learn more things. But I'm always, how can we optimize in the moment? And I think this is one of those, and I love that you're going the food route with this, which is great. Okay, so you just dropped a little nugget about magnesium being one of the food sources for Akkermansia. Did I catch that correctly?
Not for Akkermansia, but just really important for the overall gut microbiome, for that ecosystem. And one of the, so when I was doing the research, looking at different ingredient options for inclusion in Qualia Probiotic Plus, I probably researched close to 100 different things, probiotics, prebiotic fibers, nutrients, botanicals, you name it. And one of the more interesting things was just the connection with magnesium-rich mineral water and healthier both gut microbiome, but also GI symptoms. It came up over and over. And it was part of what led eventually to what's now called Qualia Magnesium Plus, our magnesium product that launched fairly recently. But the idea was that, we used to get a lot of magnesium from water, right? Like, if think of like our ancestors drinking, from streams, like they would have just been much more mineral rich waters than today. And, I know a lot of my friends and colleagues and listeners do things to purify our water or buy intentionally purified water, right? There's reasons for that, but purification strips out the minerals and the magnesium. So one of the things when I was doing this gut microbiome and GI health research, it's like, wow, we're not getting good water anymore. We would have got a lot of our minerals, and I've never seen anyone put the number on it, but I'm guessing 15 to 20% minimum of our magnesium intake came through water for even probably, my great grandparents' generation, where now it's trivial. Even a lot of mineral waters, when they've been looked at, the amount of magnesium they have in them is trivial.
Is low. So you said 15 to 20% magnesium coming from, my grandparents were raised on well water on the farms. So were the generations before them, right? So,
Yeah.
and we're not anywhere close to that in the city. You get, well, who drinks tap water? I don't,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. And
it's a thing. It's a real thing. Please say
oh,
more,
and
please.
the other thing is, there would have been a lot of other trace minerals in that well water, right? There would have been probably low amounts of boron and lithium and, dozens and dozens of other trace minerals that always were in the water with that. Just like in ocean waters, right? We talked about cellular health last time, but our cells and the mitochondria in them evolved, millennia ago, well, millions of years ago, maybe billions, in an ocean environment surrounded by mineral rich waters. So, it's still something they rely on, right? Our blood is mineral rich as well. Our blood is more the mineral content of the ocean than like our swimming pool or purified water, right?
I just adore hearing that. So women listening to this are going, well, does that mean I just need to drink my tap water? Or you're saying the purification process coming through the tap takes away those minerals?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to drink as, good water. Water's a nutrient just as important as, eating high quality food. And, there's things in our water that we may want to purify. So I mean, I purify my water. I just try to make sure I'm getting the minerals somewhere else, right? Either remineralize my water or, do things like the Magnesium Plus. And then, periodically, like as a brand, there's for people that are German speakers, I might be mispronouncing, but something like Gerolsteiner is a
Yes,
bottled mineral water that's
Pyramid water.
magnesium. Yeah, it's magnesium rich. It's one of the few really magnesium rich. Some of the other,
Interesting.
you know, best-selling mineral waters, when they've been examined, they're relatively low. So the key thing isn't, to get all, I only can drink this water. It's just to recognize that we would have gotten a lot of magnesium and other things from water in the past. We're not anymore. No surprise between that and demineralized soil. Magnesium is a really common nutritional inadequacy. So, the takeaway for the listeners isn't that they've got to like purify, not purify, do this, but magnesium for most people becomes an important thing to think about taking, because the truth is many of us, if not almost all of us, don't quite get enough. And just clinically, good things usually happen when we fill that gap.
Yes, yes. So I've heard 50% minimally of our population is magnesium deficient. I'm going to guess it's probably a lot more than that. But that's a good start, right? So what does it
Yeah.
look like when we're magnesium deficient?
So there's I don't know who created it, but there's a questionnaire called the Magnesium Status Questionnaire that someone created I'm under the impression maybe someone that was a naturopath or functional medicine person in Australia, but it's you can find versions of it if you just search magnesium status questionnaire. And they look at it, some medications, some diseases, but I think part D of it lists a bunch of what I think of as subjective symptoms, like your experiences. Um, and what these would be the things that you classically see, both if you don't get enough appearing and when you close that gap disappearing. But some are cognitive, right? Irritability, tendency to, anxiety, low mood, things like that bucket of things. Stress would maybe also be in that bucket. Some are more the cognitive, like not feeling as, mentally sharp as normal. A whole bunch happen with muscles. So cramps, muscle twitches, those types of things are super common clues that we don't have enough magnesium. Poor sleep would be another one. Pain tends to be exacerbated, or our experience of pain exacerbated when we don't get enough magnesium. And then the, other kind of bucket would be things more related to, like, I would just say stress writ large. So like the three areas I would most commonly expect to see improve on someone that needed magnesium and I gave it to them would be sleep, stress, and mood. So, but then when you start to get into menopause, I saw one study about 50% of the women in the study had improvement in hot flashes with a substantial amount of magnesium, like an amount similar to what would be in qualia, magnesium plus. The other half, no, right? So like one of the things that's interesting is we don't all respond identically to the same thing. Magnesium, from a more long-term perspective, super important in bone health, right? Those studies have been done a long time ago where, magnesium. So this was an interesting one. I happened just to stumble on within the last week, but it was women that were menopausal or older that were I think it was menopausal or older that was struggling with vitamin D status, and they'd been taking vitamin D and it hadn't corrected, and when they added magnesium for 8 weeks, it did. So magnesium, just like two things for listeners to take away. Magnesium is used in about 500 different enzymes. So just think of it, it has a lot of jobs to do.
Yes.
And then one of the things, I'm sure your listeners have heard ATP mentioned by some of your guests, right? ATP is the energy currency of our cells. It's made in mitochondria. ATP is always complexed with magnesium to do its jobs. So whenever you think, like, ATP is crazy important, but it can't work without magnesium. So that, because of that and how important ATP is, magnesium, just ends up impacting all kinds of different things in the body, the brain.
So interesting. And, it just goes to show you, you can't monotherapy anything. You really have to, see your symptoms as signs of, we need to look at this. Is this a deficiency? We can. But for someone to come in and say, well, vitamin D is going to cure all your ills. Well, listen, we're complex biology, right? So if anybody's coming at you and saying those things, you might go, okay, well, there's probably more to the picture. So I have been recommending magnesium for my patients for many, many years and doing it based on their symptomatology. And what I usually hear, and I would say by far the one that gets, I think the one that's most popular in the clinic is magnesium glycinate for women having difficulties with sleep. But there are other forms. And here's what I hear pretty much across the board. The ladies go, Dr. Lovely, I don't want to have diarrhea.
Yeah.
So, can you address that, please? Now, first of all, I tell them that's not so much the problem with magnesium bisglycinate. Like, this is more some of the other forms, but I think the forms of magnesium get really confusing for people. So, can we please have a conversation about that?
Yeah, let's start just with absorption, right? So there's what we would take. There'd be magnesium in our food, magnesium in our supplements. Magnesium glycinate would be one of those types of magnesium. So we don't absorb all the magnesium from our food or all of it that we would take in a supplement. And that's good because some gets to the gut microbiome because they need magnesium too, right? They need energy. They need, they have all these enzymes that also require magnesium. So some magnesium is always going to get, past our upper GI and not be absorbed and go to the lower GI and feed our microbiome. And if that's too great, then that starts to cause really loose stools, right? So that it would be thought of as osmotic, meaning it pulls water. And so because of that, there's, magnesium sometimes used in high doses for people that are struggling with harder stools, right? As an osmotic laxative would be the way to think about it. And there's certain types of magnesium that are proportionally less well absorbed than others. So usually you'll hear the word bioavailable used by different brands marketing supplements, but a more bioavailable form of magnesium would mean a higher percentage of it gets absorbed up in the upper part of the GI and less gets down. So certain forms like mag oxide, would be less bioavailable, so more likely to cause looser stools. Something like mag glycinate is more bioavailable, so less likely. But if you took a large enough amount, and more will get, and potentially cause loose stools, even with these really, better forms of magnesium.
That's great to hear because I've wondered that. Like, why is it that some people can take it? It's not like magnesium citrate, which from what you've just said would be less bioavailable, meaning it's more likely to cause the loose stools.
Yeah, and some like bioavailable, like our body's super smart, right? So one of the things that would be true is if we needed magnesium for some reason we're deficient, we'd absorb a higher percentage of whatever we took in a supplement. If our tissues were saturated, be like, no, I'm good. I don't need to absorb as much. So we'll let more, go non-absorbed, right, to our colon. As an example, meals may matter. Like what we eat the magnesium with may change a little bit of what's absorbed or not. So there's all kinds of things that play into it. And the other thing that seems to be the case, so you mentioned mag citrate as well. So mag citrate is both bioavailable and one that seems to contribute to loose stools in a lot of people, right? So maybe that's the citric acid or something else in addition to the magnesium. But we have mag citrate in Quiet Magnesium Plus, but it's with 8 other forms to make up, the total. So we also have the mag glycinate and all the forms I would say are well known to be bioavailable. But one of the things that happens is in our stomach, some of the magnesium bonded to glycine would be liberated. And then just that ion, right, the free magnesium would be absorbed. And some would still be bonded to, say, the glycine, and the whole molecule would be absorbed. And I think by mixing a whole bunch of magnesiums together, the transport of mag glycinate is different than mag citrate, is different than maybe magnesium when it's bonded to taurine. So you're getting more of these different ones that can get through that way and less of the big molecules that are making it to the gut microbiome. So anyways, I know we don't see with Qualia Magnesium Plus so far that issue that your patients have told you about. So.
I get pretty passionate about giving myself and my people tools that can help with stress management, and I have a new one to share. Just Thrive Probiotics. Stress is at the root of nearly everything that makes life feel harder. Sleep loss, low energy, dissatisfaction, irritability, illness, etc. We can feel powerless to do anything about it, yet our wellness depends on how effectively we can dampen the stress response. Science tells us that high stress is a foundational creator of all of the major chronic diseases. And we know exercise, healthy diet, and meditation are important, but we can still do more to stress less. Probiotics for stress, though? What? Yep. Gut health is connected to overall health, so caring for the gut microbiome can have effects on all systems of the body. Also, 80% of our immune system lives in our gut, so tending to our gut health offers us resilience and protection. The Just Thrive probiotic provides immune support, boosts health, improves sleep, promotes healthy skin, encourages healthy weight management, and supports the gut-brain connection. The Just Thrive Calm features the proprietary Mood Biotic, which is the most heavily researched and verified brain probiotic available. In multiple clinical studies, it's been shown to help effectively manage stress, champion a healthy mood, maintain balanced cortisol levels, drive peak cognitive function and great thinking, promote vitality, and support better sleep quality. I love these probiotics and I feel differently taking them. I've been taking daily probiotics for 2 decades, but these are different. I am more calm, I sleep better, and I have less digestive upsets. For a limited time, you can save 20% off a 90-day bottle of Just Thrive probiotic and Just Calm when you go to justthrivehealth.com and use the promo code LOVELY. That's justthrivehealth.com, promo code LOVELY. Well, I will say this. If we're using loose stools as so typically for the listeners, one of the ways we get this sort of idea of what your dosage should be on magnesium and other things is that you take, let's say, a capsule. Everything's fine in terms of the bowel department. You take 2 capsules, okay, things are changing a little bit, but still, still well-formed, etc. You take 3 and you're running to the toilet at 2:00 in the afternoon. That means you've reached your dose, back off by 1, and that's your dose. Now, Dr. Greg, there's probably a terminology for this as a naturopathic physician. I'm sure you know it. You know what I'm talking about, yes?
Yeah.
Yes, of course. The tolerance dose, yeah?
Yep. Yeah, bowel tolerance. You do the same sometimes, if you want to do massive doses of vitamin C,
Yes.
you take it to bowel tolerance, and you only know you hit it when you go past it, which isn't pleasant.
No, but at least you know. And listen, it's actually a pretty good measure. So I have taken magnesium for years, and you were kind enough to send me some of your Magnesium Plus before it launched. Thank you. I feel very special to have received a bottle before it launched. Thank you. I've been taking magnesium for years, literally every day. I took the same dosage of this magnesium that you sent as I normally do, and I had that experience right away. So I knew it was far more powerful than what I had taken previously. So I end up taking half a dose of what I was taking previously based on what you have in this formulation.
Thanks. Yeah, it's so if you were to take our suggested serving is 2 capsules. You can take 1, but the 2 would give 350 milligrams of what's called elemental magnesium. So if we just count the magnesium that's in it, not the things it's bonded to. And that 350 milligrams I chose intentionally, and it was with actually women in mind. The RDA for pregnant women, depending on age, for magnesium is 350 or 360, depending on age. And for all people, pregnant women, men, the recommendation is the most we should take in general from supplements is 350 milligrams. So that's why we put that at the upper limit, I guess, of the 2 capsules. But even the 1 capsule would be 175 milligrams. And so I'll diverge to a story if you don't mind. So So for listeners, my first career before becoming a naturopathic doctor is I was an officer in the Navy. I was active duty from 84 to 89, and they had paid for me to get an engineering degree. So the first ship I was on, I was in what they called the engineering department. But just think of that as below decks. You don't ever get sunshine, where all the loud equipment is. And so even back then in the 80s, hearing protection was a really big issue in the Navy. And so, if I was working in that space, we would do what was called double hearing protection. We'd take those spongy, soft ones that you'd squish up and put them in, and then put the big ones you see like on people on a flight deck, the hard ones over those, right? So we would have, double hearing protection to protect our ears from the noise, because the Navy just knew, right, that, noise stress was really bad on our ears, and they didn't want, people 20, 30 years down the road to be deaf because of that. So, so like hearing and hearing protection, long before I was a naturopath, were on my radar. And fortunately, I got out of the Navy. They tested my hearing. It was great. Had it
Thank
tested when
goodness.
I was in the reserves a few years later. It was even better. So it had improved a bit when I was in naturopathic school. Um, and I'm only bringing this up because the one thing that was studied pretty intensively in that late 80s and late 90s for helping our hearing withstand noise stress is magnesium.
Wow.
And a really specific type called magnesium aspartate was the one used in the human studies. And it wasn't a high amount. Just I think all the human studies on mag aspartate helping, and some of the studies were in, soldiers firing guns, again, noise stress, um, was only 167 milligrams. So more or less equivalent of one capsule of qualia magnesium plus. And you'll see listed, first and foremost on it is just alphabetically is magnesium aspartate. And that's why, like, I think of that as that's the hearing protection type of magnesium.
Thank you for knowing that and putting that in there. Well, the rest of us are going, well, I don't know, it's just another kind of magnesium. Somebody's got an idea of what it's supposed to do. So I'm grateful for that experience that you had because we do know that loss of hearing as we age is one of those things that contributes to dementia and Alzheimer's. And it's one of those things that we can well, hopefully prevent the loss of it, but we can certainly amplify sound with hearing aids now that are much better than they were, for our grandparents' generation.
Yeah, yeah, and you're right on the money. Like hearing, we know that goes down with aging. There's a test I used to run as part of a battery called Age Meter, but one of the tests was the highest audible pitch, and that goes down with age. So I would see that routinely in when I was testing people's
Mhm.
cognitive function.
Mhm.
And but today, I think because of earbuds, right, we're getting potentially like a lot of direct noise stress. And so noise stress um, remains. It's not something that's just isolated to Navy. A lot of the people that I know that would be, my age that have poorer hearing than I do, it's because they went to a lot of, loud concerts or, played in a rock band or, went to clubs a lot. Like, there can be lots of ways that our ears get stressed. And, if they have more magnesium, they'll be resilient. And if not, hearing suffers.
I love this. This is a great conversation. I mean, who else is talking about this? Really, it's wonderful. So you shared with me that there are 12 hallmarks of aging, and magnesium is involved in quite a few of these. Can we talk about that, please?
Yeah, so there was a paper within the last year titled Magnesium and the Hallmarks of Aging, and made a case in that scientific paper going through mechanisms of why magnesium is tied into all of them. We'll just touch on a few, but like as an example, mitochondrial dysfunction is one of the 12 hallmarks, and magnesium concentrates inside mitochondria. I think I've seen about 30% of the magnesium in cells, which is most of where our magnesium is located, is in the mitochondria. And part of that is because magnesium's sort of turns sugar into energy, into ATP. There's, I think, 10 steps before it gets to the Krebs cycle. This gets into the biochemistry, right? But like three of those need magnesium. And then I mentioned earlier that magnesium's instrumental for using ATP. So mitochondrial performance is magnesium's crucial for that. Dysbiosis is another one of the 12 hallmarks, and that dysbiosis has to do with changes in the gut microbiome. Leaky gut would be another typically common thing that occurs with the digestive system with aging. And magnesium, as I mentioned, plays a huge role in the health of our microbiome. Chronic inflammation would be a third, and magnesium is really important to counter inflammation. So yeah, it ends up just touching base in all of these different characteristics of aging, many of them more on a cellular level. And it's because, as I mentioned earlier, magnesium just does so many jobs for us.
Mhm. Yeah,
Um,
so we're learning.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
like, magnesium in the brain, as an example, is, like it works on what are NMDA receptors, right, which allow ions to flow in and out of our neurons. And if we don't have the right magnesium balance, then our brain tends to be a little less able to get into that relaxation mode, to like kind of put the brakes on and slow down.
Ooh, that's a
And
big
then
deal.
there's something called they'll refer to it there was one paper, it was, I think, titled the magnesium stress vicious cycle. But the gist of it is, if our cells don't have enough magnesium, they're less resilient to stress. And when our cells are stressed, one of their protective mechanisms is they excrete magnesium into the external world around them, right? So they're using magnesium. And so if we didn't have enough and they're wasting it when they're under stress, really quickly you get into a doom loop
Mm,
where, stress on a cellular level is really, out of control. And so it's one of the reasons I mentioned earlier, stress would be a common place I see improve when people don't have enough magnesium and get it, because it's so crucial from both
mhm.
a cellular perspective and then up. And then, like, a couple super important neurotransmitters. We need magnesium to make melatonin, right? So our
Yeah.
darkness hormone. We need magnesium to make dopamine, which is our
Mm,
motivation and, like, I'm going to get this done, our reward thing. And we need it to
yes.
make serotonin, right? So those are just three important neurotransmitters that all are reliant on having enough magnesium.
Yes,
So,
critical.
it's one of the reasons magnesium shows up in so many symptoms in that magnesium status questionnaire that seem unrelated, is because magnesium touches on so many different areas. And then, hot flashes, I mentioned earlier. PMS would be another thing that's been studied, for magnesium.
Magnesium.
The bone
Do you,
connection, oh, sorry, is because
I,
about 60% of our magnesium is stored in bones, right? So it's important for bone health.
what I was wondering about PMS, is that just and I know PMS is a cluster of, I mean, it really is a cluster, to be funny about it, but as someone who's experienced it, but I'm just wondering how much of that is just the smooth muscle effect of magnesium on things like cramping, etc.
Yeah, and well, there's you're probably much more fluent in PMS, but I think one of the categories, or archetypes, is more the mood, right? Which
Yes.
then, I mentioned magnesium super
Yes.
important for that
Yeah.
as well. So yeah, so as you mentioned earlier, nothing's a magic bullet, and there's often, more than one thing we need, but magnesium ends up being a fairly felt mineral for most people.
Yes. And what I love about it is that it has the ability, fairly inexpensively when you look at other supplements for sure, to influence many, many systems. And for me, I love things like that because there's a simplicity to it, which is really handy. I wanted to ask you about how we test whether or not we're low in magnesium. Is there such a thing?
Yeah, so I can say classically what's used. So there's magnesium outside cells, extracellular, and inside cells, intracellular. And what, right now, if, one of the listeners said, "Oh, I'm going to go to Quest or LabCorp, and, my doctor will have my magnesium measured," they could do either, right? Like, commonly they'll do plasma levels. Um, and I think I've seen less than 1% of our body's magnesium is in plasma, right? It's not where it's stored, right? It's just a visitor there. So a lot of functional medicine MDs and naturopaths, going back to when I was in school, would measure red blood cell magnesium. So that would be the magnesium that's got inside cells, right? Because, you know, until we get it inside cells, it can't do any of its work, really. And so that's generally been thought of as a better measure. And one of the things I discovered when we were doing the research on quality of magnesium plus is that even RBC magnesium, the red blood cell levels, don't necessarily correspond to what's in our tissues.
Mhm.
So as an example, in a study, you could give, like, a really bioavailable form of magnesium, and RBC levels would go up, but maybe muscle levels didn't change at all. And so, unfortunately, and this surprised me for listeners, and I'm surprised a lot, I guess, by what hasn't been studied, but how few studies I found that measured magnesium in tissue. And by few, like less than a dozen. And
Mhm.
think of all the history of magnesium studies, the
Oh,
thousands of studies, and
yes.
almost none measured what happens in tissues. And one of the studies, I think you'll love this, was and to measure these tissue levels for listeners, they just have to do animals, right? Because you're doing, at some point like a tissue sample, a biopsy. But they gave forms of magnesium in this study, 4 different types. Magnesium glycinate, which Dr. Lovely mentioned that she's a fan of and that many of her patients do well with. Magnesium citrate, another bioavailable one called magnesium malate, which is also thought of as very bioavailable, and a newer one called magnesium acetyltaurate, which is, I would say, 3 or 4 years on the market at most. It's one of the newer magnesiums. And they measured muscle tissue levels and they measured brain tissue levels. And so a couple of surprising things in this study. Magnesium malate didn't make tissue levels go up in either place. So despite being bioavailable, it didn't, tissue levels didn't move. Magnesium citrate, it went up in both tissues. So I now refer to that as the versatile magnesium because it improved in those. But it took a relatively high amount of it to kind of get tissue levels to go up. Magnesium glycinate, and you mentioned brain as a connection to why
Yeah.
brain sleep. Magnesium glycinate caused magnesium to go up in the brain, but not muscles, which was interesting. And magnesium acetyltaurate was the opposite. It caused levels to go up in the brain, but not the muscles. But the brain levels went up at a really small amount. So it took a lot less of that to make brain levels go up compared to the glycinate or the citrate. So, there was, several illustrative things in that. One is that bioavailability on its own doesn't translate into tissue levels. And 2, that these different forms of magnesium weren't all equally able to impact tissue levels, right? So in Qualia Magnesium Plus, when I was, choosing what forms, all 3 of those that made tissue levels go up are represented, in part because that's what matters at the end of the day. It's not, did it go up in our plasma? Because really, the way they often measure bioavailability is they'll give magnesium and they'll measure what happens in plasma, or they'll look at what happens in urine. And if we urinate out more magnesium, then they'll say, oh, this was more bioavailable because more must have got in. But wasting more magnesium isn't, the goal, right?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
does at the end of the day, my goal is, did it do what it was supposed to do? And that's the
Yes.
symptom, or,
Yes.
the thing the patient would notice. The changing tissue levels is the most direct means to that end. Changing RBC levels or, bioavailability, they're just, like stepping stones on the way. So long story short, to get back to your question, there's no great way we can measure that I would be confident will map to tissue levels. So I would default to symptoms like that magnesium status questionnaire rather than investing a whole bunch of money in lab testing.
Yes.
But if you're doing lab testing, RBC magnesium would be more valuable than plasma levels.
Yes. Okay. It's so often the case that we rely on science to tell us what works and what doesn't. But I think that sometimes misses the point when we ignore the symptoms, but allow what we know of science, which, as we started talking in this conversation, is small and grows all the time, right? We must maintain. It's good to have the evidence, but it's also good to remember that the human symptomatology is an important thing here too. And when things abate because you've taken a new supplement, then chances are you're doing something that's right for the body for sure.
I
So
think, yeah,
yeah,
just that's so
please.
important. And it's why I say, like, my ultimate thing is, did something do what it was supposed to do? And that's what it's
Yes.
supposed to do, right? Help that person, right? Me, you, your patients, the listeners. And that's that's the test. And my vendors, the people that I would buy the ingredients that might go into supplements, they'll constantly pitch me, oh, like mine's better because it's more bioavailable. And it's like, yeah, but does it do what it's supposed to do? Because
Oh, you're
that's,
that guy. I love it.
yeah.
There we go. Here he comes again. I
Yeah.
know he's going to say, but I love it. I love it. I love that way of looking at it. And again, we can get too stuck in one kind of way of looking at things, but we cannot forget that there's human beings behind all of this, and that's so important. And I think you and I, as natural health professionals, do a really good job at that. That's kind of the what we were taught for sure. I'm gonna come back to something you said a few minutes ago, which I just love, and I think it's a great thing to talk about. You said I'm surprised all the time, and when you're looking at, whether this is being bioavailable or not, and what's being absorbed in the blood, and what's being absorbed in the muscle and the brain, etc. And this is one of the things I teach the youngsters, that the new professionals around, is let the body and brain tell you. Don't walk in assuming you know, because you have this very expensive education you've just paid for. The body will show you its magic every time, but you have to leave your preconceived notion of what you think is going to happen behind. And actually, it was Dr. Carrick who taught me that in my functional neurology training. He basically said, "Let the brain show you. Don't assume you know what the brain is about to do. Let it show you." And I think this is a really important concept.
Yeah, this way oversimplifies it, but I tend to slice things into there's people that think by learning more, by figuring out all the biochemistry, they'll be able to block and tackle health, right? They'll be able to control it. And I'm not that person. I know a lot of biochemistry, and my body knows way more than I'll ever know. So at the end of the day, my thing is I trust my body. That my job is to give it the resources, support it in any way I can, and then trust it's got me covered, right? Like I don't have to micromanage it. It evolved to be way smarter than my brain is, right? So
Yes.
my job's easy, right? I just have to, do the good things, make sure I give it plenty of resources and listen to it. Because our body's trying to, I believe, always trying to communicate. And so that's one of the lovely things about the symptom part of that magnesium status questionnaire. We can look at those as uncomfortable or unwanted things. We can also look at them as communication, and those are clues that, oh, maybe I need this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. The body will know way more than I'll ever know. Is that what you just said? I love that. That's a
Yeah.
quotable. That's a Dr. Kelly quotable right there. That's so good. So I am going to guess that women listening to this conversation will be curious about where to find the Qualia Magnesium Plus. And we also talked about some of the other Qualia products as well, the Senolytic and the Synbiotic. I think you said is the new name for it. Yes.
It's going to be renamed to Probiotic Plus.
Synbiotic to Probiotic Plus.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, that's the one I'm off to. Oh, can
Yeah.
I have a case, please? Dr. Kelly, if I take more, does that mean it'll work faster?
We in our study of the what will be Quiet Probiotic Plus, we did a 2-week study. We measured GI symptoms, and we also used a questionnaire that focused. It's called the DASS 21, DASS 21. That D is for depression, A anxiety, S stress, and then the second S is scale. And what we saw over 3 weeks for that scale was about a 60% change in like self-reported stress, mood,
Wow.
anxiety. The GI issues, we saw about a 65% um, decrease in symptoms over 2 weeks. So
Yes.
it worked. What I would say, in my sense for these, important areas very quickly.
And I would say, you know, um, we have this sort of understanding that if a little bit's good, a lot more should be better. So I don't want to encourage that too much with my
Yeah.
statement, take a whole lot, but um, it's something I come up against quite a bit in the office. I'm like, listen, if a little bit's good, it doesn't mean take a whole bottle. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I like default to the Goldilocks principle, right? When in doubt, that there's a just right amount. And it's often yeah, I think one of my mentors used to say too much good is no good. So
That's good. That's good. I usually say in the office, so people don't forget. I say it's not boobies or beer. More is not better. And you know what? They never forget that, Dr. Kelly. They remember
I
what
can
I
believe it.
said. What kind of doctor talks like that? Anyways, where can people who are listening to this conversation find out more about the formulations that we talked about today, please?
Yeah, so our website is Qualia Life. It's Qualia life.com. We put a lot of content on Instagram, so that would be the best social media platform to follow us. On the qualialife.com website is where anytime we release a product, so the mitochondrial plus is an example, but any of the products that we release, I do a long blog talking about why we made it, what's in it, why I chose, the amount that we put in. So for people that want to nerd out, they can find lots on our website. And then we study all of our products before we would bring them to market. So with the Magnesium Plus product, we did 2 studies before we ever gave you the bottle that we sent you.
Thank goodness.
And we used that magnesium status questionnaire in both of the studies to see if people's subjective symptoms changed when they did Qualia Magnesium Plus. And what we saw in both studies was about a 30% improvement over 2 weeks, so pretty quick. We also used a sleep questionnaire and saw 25% or so improvement in sleep symptoms and about the same reduction in self-reported stress. So, for me, it ticked all the boxes of the things that I would expect a magnesium supplement, if it does what it's supposed to do, to actually do in the real world. So, we were thrilled with that. And I know I was, super excited to take Qualia Magnesium Plus. So yeah, long story short, qualialife.com, best starting place, and then just find us on Instagram. And we put lots of great content on Instagram for people that, want to know more about the brain, longevity. Those are maybe our 2 areas that we focus most on. And I would imagine many of the listeners would be like, thumbs up. Those are important to me as well.
Indeed. This is the evolution from the discussion about menopause, is to talk about longevity. And this is the thing I'm finding most fascinating right now as I get deeper into my own perimenopause and closer to the menopause transition. That's the thing I'm interested in, is now that part of my life is done. Now it's the next 40 years. What is this going to look like? And how do I make it look as healthy and good as I can? And I'm saying these kinds of things are coming out in the conversations I'm having these days. And Dr. Greg, I remember so well as soon as you started talking just how easy it is to talk to you. I so enjoy your company, and I thank you for dispensing the information that you did today with for us here at the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast.
Oh, well, thank you so much to you for having me back, to the listeners for spending their time with you and I today. My
Yes,
pleasure.
indeed. Wonderful. Well, please, let's do it again. And I must ask the final question because I know my listeners come at me if I forget. So, you were one of the first that I asked this question of a couple of years back, which was, and you told a lovely, touching story about your dad. And so I'd love to ask you the same question and see what information you're going to dispense for us today, what wisdom you will share with us today. So the question is, knowing what you know now, what would you tell your younger self?
So I think it would go back to something similar that would have triggered, but I think the most important is be a kind storyteller to ourselves, right? That, we assume that the stories we tell ourselves are real. Like one of my stories when I was a kid, big household, Irish Catholic from the Boston area, was a Simon and Garfunkel song. And the lyrics went, I touch no one touches me. I'm a rock, I'm an island, something along those lines. And that was my story for a long time. And I told people that was who I was, like, oh, like I'm good, I'm isolated, I'm like, and at some point it's like, is that story still serving me? Right? Should always be the question. Because stories we've told ourselves for a long time often just get embedded, both about ourselves and about our dad. So I shared, my story about my dad. Now if you were ask me, it's like, oh, I love my dad. I appreciate, how hard he worked. And, sure, he was grouchy and grumpy when he came home, but who wouldn't be, given, the resources his brain probably didn't have and the stress that he went through that day. And so be kind to the stories we tell about others. Figure out the best story you can tell about why someone else behaved the way they did. It may not be true, but it's as likely to be true as the negative story. And then just be really gentle and kind with the stories you tell to yourself about yourself. Because if we're better storytellers, I think at a cellular level, then our cells do better. And if they're doing better, we do better.
Oh, best wisdom bomb I've heard all year. So I'm so glad I
Oh,
asked. Dr. Kelly, thank you for joining us on the Not Your Mother's Menopause podcast.
you're welcome.
The information and other content provided in this show, or in any linked materials, is not intended and should not be construed as medical advice, nor is the information a substitute for professional medical expertise or treatment. We are doctors, but we aren't your doctor. Seek your doctor's opinion. If you or any other person has a medical concern, you should consult with your healthcare provider or seek other professional medical treatment. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something that you have heard in this podcast or in any linked materials. If you think you may have a medical emergency, call your doctor or emergency services immediately. The opinions and views expressed on this page and in this show have no relation to those of any academic, hospital, health practice, or other institution. Thank you.